Hello, everybody. We're back again. It's AASLR one more time for this week.
Double
Ralph's here. Yep.
So is that all we're going to be talking about today? Is double ASLR? I feel like that's always what we're doing.
That's the show. That's where we are.
Oh gosh,
which stands for Antisyphon Address Space Layout Randomization. So it's got a meaning.
Nice. I knew that, by the way. I was just testing you and your knowledge. You know what I mean?
I have to type out my shortcut every time because I can never remember it. And I'm always the one doing the host on the show here, and yet I can't remember it. So I don't know what that says about me.
What
bad RAM.
Yeah.
But anyway, Ralph's here to talk about Ansible.
Surprise.
Right? Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to hand it over to you. It's all yours. Take it away. You want your screen?
Yeah, I'll take my screen. I was going to say, I'm not ready. I'm just going again. All right. So, hey, everybody. I'm going to be talking about Ansible today. So surprise, surprise. I'm going to keep this incredibly getting started, right? So this is kind of really targeted to someone who has no idea. Maybe you've heard the name and you're like, cool, that's great. I don't know why, but I just heard about it, right? And this is actually something I teach in my class. We'll talk about that later at the end of the show or whatever. But in general, Ansible is a pretty cool tool. And I guess if you haven't got any experience with it, we're going to kind of play around with it. I'm going to talk about it, and then we'll kind of get our hands dirty. I'll show you guys some really simple examples. I'm going to try to, like I said, keep it very simple with what you could do with Ansible. And if we have enough time, we might get into some other stuff. So I guess let's get rolling. All right, so let's talk about Ansible. Just a quick overview. By the way, it won't be too many slides here, so it's mostly demo. So what is Ansible? So it's really an open source configuration management tool, okay? And the idea of Ansible is to help you configure host operating systems and a lot of other stuff too. It's a pretty big project at this point, and there is really a lot that it can do. There's probably something that you could use inside of your either assessments or whatever it may be. There's a lot of use cases. It allows us to create infrastructure as code. It allows you to kind of, it's not just about automating, but it's also about writing playbooks. In this case, that's what Ansible calls them, which you could describe as like a kind of a guide, right? Writing that as code, so you don't have to keep explaining either to other people how something works or having to manually perform that task, right? It's actually Python based. Not my favorite programming language, but there's so many modules and stuff. If somebody wanted to rewrite Ansible in some other language, it would probably just not be worth your time. But that said, it is pretty versatile. And for what we're using it for what Ansible is doing, Python works great. It's also kind of one of its benefits because Python is built into a lot of operating systems minus Windows, but Ansible can configure Windows host, but it's not really a great host operating system to run Ansible from. The primary configuration is YAML, and so it's pretty easy to read. That's kind of the benefit of Ansible. You're not going to actually really need to know how to write in Python if that's not your strong suit. It just uses Ansible, and it's pretty easy to set up. Okay, and we'll kind of show you some of the YAML files and kind of how they're structured. But yeah, Red Hat is the maintainer of this software, and as such, I don't think it's going anywhere, and it has tons and tons of pull requests and features and additions. It's a very active project. Okay. So this isn't just, a couple guys, even though there's plenty of code that we all rely on. That's just a couple guys that's open source. But this is a very big project. Ansible doesn't really have the concept of state. The reason I bring that up is just to get a idea of kind of how it works. And so the best way to think of how Ansible works is you say, I want to do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, in that order, right? And, those can be as simple as running a command right on the host. Ansible uses something called modules to kind of replace running something like apt-get update, right? And it goes in order, right? So first thing, second thing, third thing, in that order, right? But it doesn't know what it did in the past if you were to run the playbook again. I just want you to it'd have to do it all over again. So it does a lot of checks. And just an idea. It's procedural. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's really good for OS configurations, and it's not that great for cloud, right? I'll probably do another webcast on Terraform where we talk about like configuring anything with an API. But operating systems don't natively have something like a REST API. So Ansible is really good at communicating with operating systems. Like I said, it's a very active project. It's totally free, open source. There's really no licensing model around Ansible. So there's no, sign up for this. If you want to do this, you got to pay this. So it's very open in that way. It is agentless. So there are many other infrastructure as code projects out there that use something called an agent. And what would happen is that if you want to use this configuration management tool, you would install the agent on the device, and then on some other device, you would connect that agent, and then that agent can be queried to find out information about the device. The way Ansible works is it uses 2 primary protocols to communicate with host, depending on the operating system. It uses either SSH for Linux, and it uses WinRM for Windows. And what it will do is it connects to the other device over one of those 2 protocols and starts issuing commands. The only requirement on the host is that it has Python. In the case of SSH, it probably has Python, which is not an agent, right? It's just one of the requirements to execute. And then on Windows, WinRM needs to be enabled. So WinRM is built into the Windows operating system, but it's not enabled by default, okay? Again, why using Ansible? The YAML configuration is very simple. And while it can be a little complex when you start writing a lot of nested things, arguably speaking, overall, it's just not like a traditional programming language, okay? There's really large module support, which is another reason to use Ansible. Like a lot of stuff that I haven't even done or touched or even got into that it can do. And it's just another thing, kind of on the list of features, right? It replaces bash scripts. So that's the best way to think of it. If you've ever written a bash script before, which I was writing one recently for a current engagement, you're like, why didn't I write an Ansible? Well, because it just didn't fit the mold, right? Like I didn't want to have to bring Ansible into the case, right? Bash scripts are really good if you're writing something that is like 3 lines, like do this, do that, do this. All right, cool. All right, 3 commands or something. Bash scripts aren't that bad, honestly. And they provide a easy simplicity. I don't need to install anything, so on and so forth, right? But as soon as you start getting into a longer bash script, Ansible probably is what you should be doing, okay? Whether you're running that Ansible directly on the host, meaning no kind of SSH connection, it can run localhost, which you'll see, or you're connecting to the host remotely, okay? So it does replace bash scripting. And the biggest thing that it does is in a bash script, when you execute a command and there's an error or something gets ran twice and it causes, a file to get edited that shouldn't be, then you have to start putting logic into your bash script. A lot of the Ansible modules already have that logic, so they're not going to change something that's already been changed, which is awesome, right? And it makes your code repeatable. All right, just a couple of pitfalls about Ansible. It can be slow. I talked at the very beginning, I said Ansible is procedural. We'll do step 1, step 2, step 3. Those are great. But if you got a lot of steps, it could take a little while to check everything, okay? Additionally, because it doesn't have the concept of state, it doesn't know what it did if you run Ansible Playbook again. It'll check all of those things again because it's trying to create the same effect, right? The same configuration. So it's going to go check to see if anything's been changed, right? So while that's good, it does create a little bit of slower execution depending on where you're at. It still requires logic. Okay. So Ansible modules do allow you to execute something, and it should, for the most part, do some checks. But sometimes you've got to bring in your own logic. You're going to be doing this first, doing that first. Now, Ansible does support a bunch of different ways to add logic. We're not going to get into that in this really basic intro to Ansible, but logic is there. It's not really good for APIs. Ansible does support communicating with cloud provider APIs like DigitalOcean, AWS, a bunch of other things like that, right? Including other APIs that aren't really as popular, right? Or you could write your own module, in fact, in Python. But because of the state lists not knowing. With REST APIs, it tends to not be as fun to write, especially. I've attempted it. All right, last slide here. This is just a quick diagram of kind of what Ansible is doing, right? So you have your Ansible machine, and it's going to SSH into, let's say, node 1, node 2, and node 3. Now, what it can do is I can execute these commands at the same time. So we get some kind of, linear scaling here so that I could actually configure 3 hosts all at the same time. That actually does save us time, right? Especially if you add it to like 100 hosts, right? But when you're just configuring 1 host, it's going to be the same as if you're configuring 100 hosts, right? But this is just a quick diagram of kind of what the execution looks like. All right, so that's all the slides. Let's kind of jump in to using Ansible. All right. And sorry, I gotta reshare my screen, guys. Sure, pick the right one here. All right. Okay, so I see we had a couple statements in there. One, WinRM or SSH access can be used to configure Windows hosts. This is correct. You can use SSH to configure a Windows host as well. But usually the prerequisite is that you have to install or configure the SSH server on Windows. Now, depending on the version of Windows, it may already be available, or you'll be able to add that feature, right? WinRM is kind of built in. Honestly, I've used both, right? And it just really kind of comes down to personal preference and how you want to configure the operating system. So, all right. Okay, so what you're looking at is a VS Code session, okay? And I have went ahead and set up a DigitalOcean VM that is running Ubuntu 22.02. That's it. It's nothing else special. And what I've done is I've actually connected into this droplet over SSH. You can see the IP down there. And then I went ahead and opened up a terminal here. So I am the root on this device, and there's nothing on here. You can see on the left-hand side, I have the file system available to me for this operating system. And we're going to use VS Code and this SSH session to kind of play with Ansible. The first thing we need to do, though, is we need to install Ansible. Now, there's plenty of guides out there to do it, and it's really not that hard. So I'm going to run a couple commands here. The first one I'm going to do is apt-get update, and then the second one is I'm going to install the software properties common. I threw the yes flag in there, so it'll go ahead and install that. The next thing I'm going to do is add the repository for Ansible, so I get kind of the latest Ansible as opposed to the one that's maintained through Ubuntu. So I'll type that command in there, and we will add the Ansible repository. And do an apt-get update. Oh no. Is Kinetic not in the repo? I might have to move this over. We'll see here. No, we're good. All right. So, and then I did a apt-get install for Ansible. So this might take a second. It'll download all the Python dependencies. You'll see we're downloading Ansible core and then the actual Ansible module. Might take just a second here. All right. So while that's going, no big deal. We are going to go ahead on the left-hand side here. We're going to make a new folder. Let's call it Ansible. All right. And then inside there, we're going to make a new file. And we're going to call this run.yml. Yes, we need to sacrifice all the chickens for these demos because I've tested none of this. So this is all live. All right, cool. Now that we've tempted the demo gods, let's continue on. So I'm just going to make one file called run.yaml. And I'm going to show you guys pretty much kind of the simplest Ansible I think I could configure. So first, we could see that Ansible playbook is here. And if we type that in, you can kind of see the help here for Ansible playbook, which there is a lot of different ways to kind of execute this. I'm going to go ahead and CD into this Ansible folder, and you can see our run.yaml files right here. I'm going to paste a very simple playbook. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, you can see one thing that you can also do in VS Code is we can go ahead and enable the extensions for this, so we can get kind of like syntax highlighting for this. So if you go over to extensions here, we can type in Ansible. And what we're going to do is we're going to install the extension on the remote device here, because I actually have it on my host, but I don't have it on the remote device. And what this will do is this will enable syntax highlighting, so we can kind of see if something's not right with our Ansible. All right, cool. Now you can see instead of just white, we kind of get this. It also do Ansible lending if you have that set up. All right, cool. And you can see the color shade moving. All right, so what we have here is we have a very simple playbook. We have given it a name up the top here. I'm going to set the host. So this is where you could define the host that you want to communicate with. In this case, for our super simple example, we're saying localhost. So we're actually going to be running these commands on our own system, okay? And we're setting connection type to local. You could set that. This is where you would set something like SSH, or you could set something like WinRM. Additionally, you could actually define the host name here, use an inventory file. We can kind of get into that. But in general, we're just going to be running these commands on our own host. The next thing is like, what do we want Ansible to do? So we can give it some task, okay? So whenever you have a task, you typically want to give it a name. It's kind of a requirement. And so this is just saying, just execute ls-lrt, right? And then the command. You could put whatever you want in here. Doesn't matter, but this is what's going to show up when you run the playbook. It's like what it did, okay? I'm using the module shell, which is the most basic of modules inside of Ansible. What this means is the module will execute whatever command you have here in the terminal on the host, right? It doesn't have really any logic, and it should be your last resort when it comes to executing things. Sometimes you want to run something on a Linux host and there's no existing Ansible module that kind of does the logic for you. That's when you might use the shell command, okay? There's kind of like a lot of ways to skin the cat when it comes to building Ansible playbooks, and you kind of have the autonomy to do it however you want. But trying to use a module is kind of the preferred way to do it, because it'll do some more checks, whereas shell is not going to do any kind of checks. In this case, super simple. The next thing we're doing is we're going to use a register. Now, what a register is just a way to save some output from, let's say, this task, okay? And that register, you could also save stuff to a file. There's a bunch of stuff you could do. But in this case, we're just going to save this to the output register, which is going to be a variable. And we are then going to use the debug module, which again is aptly used for debugging things, to just output something to our terminal when Ansible runs, right? And simply put, it's going to run this command, ls-lrt, in the current folder that we execute the playbook in, right? It's going to output, save that to a variable called output. And what we're going to do is when we run debug, we're going to reference that variable and output it to standard, the standard output of the lines. You could also output the standard error. There's a bunch of ways to do this, right? Awesome. So very simple playbook here. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And we are going to say Ansible playbook run. And if everything works, it did. All right. So at the very top here, you can see that we have no inventory, right? So typically you could have an inventory, lots of different hosts that you want to configure, and you could decide when or how you want to call those hosts. You can also decide when you call the playbook which host you want to use. So there's lots of options. But at the top here, you can see the first thing it did is gather host facts. So Ansible will gather all the facts about the host. including operating system type, a bunch of other facts. You can actually tell Ansible to not gather facts about the operating system, but you can utilize those facts later on to do different kinds of conditionals, right? My task right here, just execute a command. You can see that this is orange because it actually changed something. It'll kind of always be orange in this case because the module shell doesn't have the logic to check if something is or not changed. And then the debug is the actual debug. So you can see our output, our standard out lines is just the output from ls-lrt, right? And there we are. So very, very simple playbook, just one YAML file. You could see that you could add more tasks here to do more things. You know, whatever you want to do, right? Trying to keep it as simple as possible. And we're running it on our own host, right? I haven't even got into SSHing to another host. But what if you want to do something a little more complex? Even more importantly, what if you want to do something more complex, but you don't really want to have to figure out what all the lines are or what all needs to be done? One example of that is installing Docker. It's something I utilize a lot. Now, if you go look up, there's probably some guides on how to install Docker on Ubuntu. Great. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to use a Ansible role that's already been pre-built. Like I don't have to go figure this role out, or I don't have to go figure out all the commands, or I don't even have to build the role. I'm going to use one of these roles, and we're going to pull it from the Ansible Galaxy, okay, which is just like this equivalent of a big repository of a bunch of useful tasks that you might want to do on an operating system. One of those in this case is installing Docker. So I'm going to go ahead and use this role. Now, I do want to show you this real quick. The role, I'm going to kind of switch screens real quick here. All right. So this is the Ansible role, and it is written by Gerling Guy, who makes a lot of other Ansible roles, but this is the Git repository for this role. Now, he has included some documentation on kind of how to use the role and how to set it up, and kind of all the nuances and options. You can see at the bottom here, we're going to need a couple things to kind of make this work. And he'll give you kind of an example playbook, right? So we're pretty much just going to call the role. You can also see that the actual role lives over here at Ansible Galaxy. And in here, you can see the one-liner to install the role. You can also see what versions of the operating system are supported. And you can go from there. Now, I'm hoping this 2202 works, but we'll see. But anyways, so this is kind of Ansible Galaxy. Now you can go search for more roles for doing other things. But right now, we're going to install Docker on our host that doesn't have Docker. And we're going to use Ansible to do it. And we're not going to have to look up all the commands of how it works. So to do that, I am going to switch right back over to my VS Code session that is running. All right. And we are going to, yeah, I'm sharing it again. All right. Can you share the VS Code again? There it is.
Sorry, I was busy swatting bots.
Swatting, yeah, bot swatting. Oh yeah, new girls in my area. Interesting. All right. So right now we just have this run command, and what we're going to do is we're just going to install a couple things to install Docker, right? We're going to install the role on the host so that we can install Docker, right? Now, you could do this on your local host and run it remotely. We could get into that in another lab, but let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to run a couple commands that to make sure our the first one is to make sure this community general collection is installed. Ansible, no. It might already be installed, so hold on. I'm not sure why these collections aren't working. Demo gods, help me. Identifier. All right, well, let's keep driving on. Let's see if this role will install. So Ansible Galaxy installed. A collection is slightly different than a role, but let's see if. All right, so it did grab the role itself. So what it does is Ansible Galaxy, when you say the name of the role, it'll reference the Git repo, the GitHub repo, and then actually download it, and then it saves it to your host. You could see that the actual role got saved to the root.ansible folder, which is the default folder to save this role. The other thing we're going to do is to make this role work, we're going to install the girlandguy.pip. All right, and now let's go ahead and utilize this role. So I am going to change a couple things. So instead of calling some task, I am going to change this up. I'm going to specify a roles section, and then I'm going to specify the roles that I want to use. So girlandguy pip and girlandguy docker. Up here, I can specify some variables. Now you could set up your own variables file. You could include a variables file. You could include it in when you call the playbook. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, but I'm just going to keep it, like I said, as simple as possible. And I'm just going to apply some variables here when I run the playbook. The variable name is the first part, and the variable value is the second part, right? So in this case, the variable host name equals hackerops change me, right? Now, we're not going to be using that in this particular example, but if in the case of girlandguy's role for Docker, I do believe there's the ability to specify some other options. Now, I believe the default is this, but I just want to show you how it would work. So I'm going to specify one variable, and this is the Docker edition, and I'm setting this to CE for community edition, right? And you could change this to enterprise edition, so EE if you wanted to, but this will get referenced when this role works, right? The other thing I want to do is I am going to install a pip package, right? And the way I'm going to do that is with this variable. So now this is a nested variable. So I'm saying pip install packages. So when this role runs, right, by default, it installs pip, but it doesn't install any pip packages. Pip is a Python package manager. And I'm going to actually have it install this Docker package, right? So when this role runs, it will install pip. It will see that this variable has been defined and that Docker has been changed, or that variable has been defined with a Docker, or excuse me, with a value of Docker. So it's going to install the pip package Docker. And then this role is actually going to install Docker, right? So two different things. One, we're going to install pip, the Python package manager. Second one, we're going to install Docker. Now, we're going to be installing this on our local host. Again, up here, connection host local. So let's go ahead and do it. So we will run the same command again. So Ansible Playbook run.yaml. And what did we do? Installation. I don't think it is a tab there. I might have to Ansible lint this. Demo gods, how dare you? So this is kind of one of the nuances of what do you call it? YAML, right? Could be a tab here. It could be kind of my structure. But I'm going to go ahead and comment it out just to see what we get here. It is not vars. Is it all the vars? More check-ins. It's all good. More variables. I want to say maybe it's right there. All right. I know it's a spacing here, guys. Sorry. I'm just like taking them all out here. Let's get something to run. All right. I'm gonna come back to this. So it's gonna install pip here. And then it is going to install Docker. And let's see where I messed up on the other part here.
Someone is saying you missed a hyphen.
Did I miss
after vars?
Did I miss a hyphen after vars? Let's see here. So vars, and should just be one. And that should be under pip. Yeah, that looks exactly how it should be. Let's see here. What am I missing? And vars. No, I mean, I don't see anything else. I mean, I could technically move this over too. It doesn't need to be right on the top there. There we go. All right. Formatting with the YAML file. One other thing it looks like, and of course, I picked Ubuntu 22.02, and the Gerling Guide Docker is not designed to actually go up to that. I'm looking at his Ansible role documentation, and he only goes up to Jammy, I believe, which is 22.02, and I'm like 22.01, I think. Let's see here. I kind of 22.10, excuse me, which is kinetic. And that's what this error is right here. There's actually not a release package, I don't think, for Docker and Ubuntu Kinetic. So, all right. Well, time being the limit here, I know exactly what the problem is. So there's a couple ways I could fix it, but in general, I probably should have just used 22.02 or 22.04, excuse me, which is the stable version as opposed to 22.10. But this would still work if everything was, if we're using the right version of Ubuntu. But that's kind of all I had for today. I just wanted to show you guys kind of the basics here, even though, you know, we ran into this little package error. I could go fix it, which mainly would require me to start working through the role or just using the right version of Ubuntu. So that's on me, guys. But this playbook is still pretty valid. And what this will allow us to do is it did install pip. That actually wasn't a problem. It's when we started getting into Docker. So if we see here, pip is now installed. It wasn't installed before. And yeah, that is all I had for today. Any questions, guys?
Now's the time for questions.
Mike's got all the, he's been posted in there. I wasn't reading the text.
He was trying to help you out.
Yeah, I know for sure.
Swap me and you. There we go. Well, while we're giving you guys like I was going to say 5 minutes. No, 30 seconds of get your questions typed in. We're going to promote your class because why not?
Oh, yeah.
Here's the link for the class. It's Hacker Ops with Ralp May.
I promise there's more testing done. Yeah. So here's
the what it looks like.
Yeah, right. The class that I teach is actually geared for doing assessments, right? So I use a lot of these tools like Ansible and Terraform to try to speed up conducting assessments and to kind of show you how they all work, right? Like I said, today I really try to keep it really as simple as possible. But in this class, we kind of go from not knowing anything, learning Ansible, learning Terraform, and then we really start diving into the security tools. So for doing pen tests and other things like that, right? I try to give you guys the foundation of how to use these tools so that you can go apply this however you want, right? To hopefully solve some problem or challenge that you have that you don't want to keep doing over and over again. So yeah. But yeah, I will hopefully come back for another one of these. We can keep going. I'll keep expanding on from starting to you know, where we're at. So
sweet.
Well, thank you. No real prerequisites for the class. I would say, you know, having a little bit of just willingness to, play around with these things. I do end up applying a bit of more advanced stuff at the end for doing red teams and stuff like that. But it just really depends on your goals. But no, not necessarily like strong prerequisites. I really try to start from the very beginning. So.
Ansible can take over tickets.
Not exactly sure what he means by that.
What do you mean by that, Brian?
You could pretty much do anything you want with Ansible.
Can I make you coffee?
Yes. I have a coffee machine that's ran by Ansible. It uses CI/CD pipelines. So that's another thing I talk about in my class. So
how to make a coffee machine?
How to make a
no? How to run a coffee machine?
How to make coffee with Ansible? Right?
There we go.
Awesome.
Oh, something about repetitive tickets.
Yes. He's talking about like doing the same thing over and over again, and like Ansible can automate you out of your job, right? Like try to take over, like if you're getting a ticket to do this, and that over and over again, right? So. Yes, for sure. All right, guys. Well, hey, I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me for the last 30 minutes, and hopefully I'll sacrifice some more chicken gods next time.
When's your next class? That's a good question right there.
Yeah, I think my next class is beginning of the year. I have to look at the date. I don't even know.
We've got as we kind of teased this yesterday with Joff, so I'll tease it again today. There's a big training thing that we're calling a summit that's going to happen early next year. I don't know if it's technically spring yet or not, but it's going to be next year. The big thing where there's going to be a whole bunch of classes at the same time, that sort of thing. Details we don't have completely nailed down, but it's coming. The other thing we can say is you have stuff for on demand. Is that correct?
Yes.
Seeing it here.
Yes, I do. I do have an on demand, so you can watch the videos and the labs. I actively update the labs and keep that stuff pretty live. I have a lot of like code in there, so I try not to keep it going stale. But yeah, there you get access to all the labs, all the videos, and then obviously you can ask me questions anytime you want. So.
And the thing that's that we're planning would be a all virtual thing.
Yes, it would be all.
There's a question in the chat, so.
Yeah. So one question: can Ansible build VMs for home labs, or is it more for systems that are already live? That's a good question. So there is another tool which I talk about in my class called Packer, and Packer is designed to actually build images either from an ISO or from what do you call it, an existing image or whatever it is. You can just use Ansible and Packer together. And so I do have a lab where I show you guys how to build a Windows 10 image from an ISO without manually building it. And then you can take that and apply Ansible on top to configure the rest of the operating system. And you can kind of get these like whatever builds you want, right? And this allows you to go back later and change something without having to like manually go in and do that kind of piece, right? So yeah.
Virtual for the win.
Yeah. Ansible, if you're doing home lab, you're doing security assessments, you're doing any of that stuff, it is really a nice card to have in the tool belt. And it's very, very versatile, which is why I continue to use it and really don't have any plans to look for something else to replace it in the sense of, it's a Swiss Army knife. So, but yeah, thanks awesome. Everybody.
Yeah, let's wrap it up and kill it with fire, as we say.
Kill it with fire.
All right. Till next time, everybody.